The United Nations headquarters in New York has long been described as the theater of global diplomacy. Its tall glass towers, reflecting the waters of the East River, are symbols of ambition, compromise, and conflict. On any given day, the corridors hum with whispers in dozens of languages, as officials carry folders stuffed with talking points and secret agreements. Welcome viewers to my channel. Please subscribe, like my video and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. The conference rooms are rarely silent, filled with the measured cadences of leaders speaking for their nations. The General Assembly Hall, with its sweeping green marble backdrop and iconic golden emblem, has witnessed everything from thunderous applause to icy silence. Yet there is one constant that binds every gathering: the sense of stagecraft. Every speech, every gesture, every carefully constructed phrase is delivered not just to those in the room but to the entire watching world. It was into this arena that Mark Carney stepped. Though not a head of state, Carney carried the weight of credibility and influence. He had spent years at the pinnacle of the financial world, steering economies through crises, earning trust even from those who disagreed with him. To some, he represented stability in a world where uncertainty had become the norm. To others, he was a reminder that technocrats and financial elites often held as much power as elected leaders. On this day, Carney was not expected to stir controversy. He was scheduled to give remarks on global trade, financial markets, and the need for international cooperation in the face of turbulence. The audience expected numbers, policy prescriptions, and perhaps a gentle nudge toward consensus. What they did not expect was laughter. To understand why the moment was so striking, one must first understand the mood of the room before Carney spoke. The session had been dominated by heavy topics: climate change, shifting alliances, trade disputes, and security threats. The speeches were often long and dense, filled with the language of diplomacy, phrases like mutual respect, shared responsibility, and collective security. These were words designed to soothe tensions without resolving them, to acknowledge differences without sparking open conflict. Delegates sat in their rows, listening politely, taking notes, occasionally nodding. But beneath the surface of civility, there was unease. The world was in flux, and much of that instability revolved around one man: Donald Trump. Trump's presidency had disrupted the rhythms of international politics in ways few had anticipated. His approach to foreign policy was blunt, transactional, and often confrontational. He dismissed multilateralism, criticized allies, praised adversaries, and wielded tariffs as weapons. For leaders accustomed to decades of U.S. presidents who played the role of anchor in global affairs, Trump was something entirely different: unpredictable, unrestrained, and unwilling to follow the script. Some admired him for shaking up what they saw as a stagnant order. Others feared him for destabilizing the very institutions that had maintained relative peace for generations. But whether admired or feared, he was impossible to ignore. Even when he was not on the stage, Trump's presence dominated the room. Delegates whispered about his next move, his latest tweet, his most recent comment to the press. Would he walk out of a meeting? Would he insult a counterpart? Would he make a sweeping promise one day and reverse it the next? The unpredictability was exhausting for diplomats trained to value predictability above all. They had to prepare for every possibility, to interpret every signal, to brace for shocks. And so, as Carney prepared to take the microphone, the atmosphere was one of restrained tension. The delegates expected seriousness. They expected another speech that walked the careful line of acknowledging American power without provoking the president's temper. Carney, with his reputation for balance and pragmatism, seemed the perfect figure to deliver just that. The room itself reflected this anticipation. Delegates shifted in their seats, adjusting their earpieces for translation. Journalists poised their pens and cameras, ready to capture quotes for stories that would otherwise fade into the routine coverage of international gatherings. There was no expectation that Carney's remarks would make headlines. At best, they might be cited in policy journals or mentioned in the financial press. Few thought that his words would set off an eruption of laughter that would echo far beyond the chamber walls. But beneath the surface, there was another dynamic at play. Many in the room had grown weary of the constant drama surrounding Trump. They were tired of the bluster, the unpredictability, the confrontations. They longed for someone, anyone, to puncture the atmosphere, to break the monotony of deference and formality. They would not do it themselves, of course. Diplomacy requires restraint. But if someone else were to take that risk, if someone were to voice what they were all secretly thinking, the release would be electric. Carney may not have been a head of state, but that gave him a certain freedom. He was respected, but he was not bound by the same political constraints as elected leaders. His role as a central banker, an economic thinker, allowed him to speak with a degree of independence. He could frame his words as observations rather than provocations. And perhaps that is why, when the moment came, he dared to say what others would not. The stage was set in more ways than one. The hall was filled with the usual trappings of diplomacy, the flags, the placards, the translators, booths, but the undercurrent of tension, the anticipation of something unscripted, gave the scene a different charge. It was like the quiet before a storm, the moment before a comedian delivers a punchline, the instant when an audience leans in, not knowing what comes next. This backdrop matters because it explains why the laughter that followed hit with such force. In a room conditioned to solemnity, humor is disruptive. In a setting where every word is weighed, a joke can feel like a jolt of electricity. And when that joke touches on the most powerful figure in the room, or, in this case, the world, the effect is magnified beyond measure. Carney, stepping to the podium, carried himself with the composure that was his trademark. He adjusted his notes, cleared his throat, and began to speak in his steady, deliberate cadence. He spoke of trade imbalances, of the need for cooperation, of the dangers of isolationism. The delegates listened, as they always did, their faces impassive. But then, as he shifted to a reference that touched on Trump, his tone changed ever so slightly. He allowed a hint of irony into his voice, a flicker of timing that seasoned performers know instinctively. And then, almost casually, he delivered the line that would set the room ablaze. The precise wording of the joke is less important than the reaction it provoked. In that instant, the solemnity shattered. Laughter broke through the silence like a dam giving way. It was laughter that had been building quietly in the minds of many, restrained by protocol, now finally released. For some, it was relief. For others, it was vindication. For all, it was unforgettable. And so, before the joke itself is even examined, the stage must be understood. It was not merely a room filled with leaders. It was a room saturated with tension, shaped by the presence of a president who had upended norms, waiting for a crack in the surface. Carney provided that crack, and once the laughter began, it could not be contained. This was not a comedy club, nor a campaign rally, nor a late-night talk show. It was the United Nations. And that is what made the eruption so remarkable. The weight of anticipation is a peculiar thing. It is silent, invisible, yet it presses on everyone present, altering the way they sit, the way they listen, the way they even breathe. At the United Nations Conference Hall, as Mark Carney's speech unfolded and edged closer to the moment that would draw out unexpected laughter, the atmosphere thickened with this very anticipation. Delegates, heads of state, and ministers leaned forward slightly in their seats, some out of habit, others out of necessity. They had been conditioned to expect long monologues filled with statistics and carefully balanced language. And yet, even without knowing it, they were waiting for something more, something unscripted that would puncture the monotony of diplomatic rituals. The UN is unlike any other stage. It is not a campaign rally where partisans roar in unison. It is not a press conference where leaders seek to dominate the narrative. It is a gathering of the world in miniature, where each delegate sits not only as an individual but as a symbol of their nation. Every reaction, every clap, every frown carries significance. When the General Assembly laughs, it is not simply humor, it is diplomacy speaking in the most human voice possible. This is why moments of levity are so rare here, and why they carry such disproportionate power when they appear. To appreciate the tension in the room, one must remember that many of those seated had experienced moments of open discomfort under Trump's presidency. They had endured lectures about NATO spending, threats of tariffs, sudden shifts in foreign policy that seemed to come out of nowhere. Behind their polished smiles lay frustration, sometimes even resentment. But these emotions could never be openly displayed. Diplomacy demands control, even when the pressure inside is nearly unbearable. So they listened, stoic and still, maintaining the mask of composure. Yet beneath that mask was a yearning, for release, for honesty, for a moment that revealed that everyone in the room, no matter how powerful, was still human. Carney's approach to the podium tapped directly into this quiet yearning. His voice was calm, his manner collected. Nothing in his posture or delivery suggested that he was about to trigger a cascade of laughter. And perhaps that was precisely why it worked. The audience did not brace for humor, did not prepare themselves for a joke. They expected balance sheets and cautionary